Hey, what's going on? It's Jordan from Just Tesla, and today we're going to answer the age-old question: should you buy a used Model S or should you buy a brand spanking new Model 3? Let's just jump straight into it. Now, there are many things to cover because there's a lot of factors that weigh into the decision between buying the two cars. So here we go. I'm going to be stacking up the Model 3 Standard Range Plus, which is the vehicle we own, versus the Model S P90D. Now, in most people's circumstances, if you're looking at a Model S at this price bracket, you're probably looking something at like the 75 or the 85D. Whichever it is, I still think this comparison is completely relevant. The reason I'll be comparing these two is because these are the ones I've had a really good hands-on experience with. Also, remember, some of this is just my opinion, but where I can, I want to keep it fact-based so you can make the best decision possible. So I know a lot of people out there are thinking about buying a used Model S because the prices of used Model S's do stack up against the prices of brand new Model 3s, and they're wondering which one they should get. So hopefully this helps you guys out. It's a hard decision to make. It's a decision we had to make. But yeah, I think I've got the answer. So we're going to break it down. So firstly, we'll start with looks. Now, again, this is just my opinion on both of the cars. But if you're looking at a Model S in a similar price bracket or cheaper than a Model 3, you will be looking at the older shaped Model S with the front nose cone, similar to the one I have right here. You could look at a newer shaped one, which Tesla, I think, updated in 2016 by changing the front bumper to something that I feel complements the car more. If you are looking at something like that, you're probably comparing to maybe the Model 3 Performance as opposed to the Standard Range Plus. And yeah, it's a different kind of argument at that point. So to me, the front nose cone screams outdated, and it really doesn't work for me. There's something about it I don't like. But because this is a P90D, it definitely has a sportier look and a more aggressive stance, which definitely gives you more road presence. So they've got thicker wheels at the back, larger rims, and from the back, this car looks stunning. So the looks have definitely grown on me over the last few weeks, and it's one of those cars that you're extremely proud to be stepping inside of in a car park. It looks fantastic. So the Model 3. So when I first saw the Model 3, way back before I was owning it, I wasn't actually a massive fan of the front of the car, and that was from photos online. But this thing in person is amazing. So you've got these low scoops right down here at the front of the bumper, which give it like a Porsche kind of look going off. Now, Porsches are pretty terrible EVs, but we can all agree that they do know how to make a good looking car. We move around the back, and for me, the rear end is so well balanced. The car is just right. It just looks right. It looks great. It's definitely not as aggressive as the S, and because of that, it does have a little bit less road presence. But with a few simple modifications, this thing definitely hangs with the Model S. And because it's newer, it just pips the Model S for me. But keeping with looks, just before we round this one, in terms of attention, the Model S definitely gets more looks. I think it just looks more sporty and more expensive. People who know nothing about cars just think that it's something special. People photograph the car going past, which is baffling to me. So the Model S definitely gets a lot of attention. Now, that's not to say that the Model 3 doesn't get looks, but the Model 3 seems that it's more younger people that recognize the Model 3. So when you're parked outside our studio, we get a few people taking snaps of it. So which one would I say wins in looks? It's a very close battle, to be honest, but with a few simple mods like taking aero wheel covers off, I think the Model 3 wins. It's just a little more pulled together. It just works a little bit better for me and just looks a bit more complete. Now, if you manage to get the facelift Model S, I think I'd have to give it to Model S. But at this point between these two cars, I would pick the Model 3. So now we step inside. Now, just sticking with the interior looks for now, I have driven the Model 3 first. That is the first ever Tesla I drove. It was the Model 3. So when I got into the Model S after owning the Model 3, all I had to go off was what I'd seen in the Model 3. So first impressions, I was really let down by the Model S. I expected so much more from it, and unfortunately for me, it just felt so dated. It felt really dated. The interior space just feels old, And I think once you've experienced the minimalism of the Model 3, adjusting to the Model S is just strange. And there's just way too much going off. So the center console feels huge in comparison. The finish of is leather and suede inside the Model S, which you would think looks great, but again, it just feels like an old-fashioned kind of sports car. Stuff like the makeup mirrors, you can see, they just feel flimsy and cheap. It's not as dialed in as the Model 3. This one has a lovely sunroof, but it's not really practical for England. And the inside doors for me are a great example of just too much going on. I do like the big chunky armrest, but that's about it, to be honest. When you get inside the Model 3 though, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's not similar to anything I've ever driven before. The minimalism can be daunting at the start, but after a while you feel that this is like the new normal. And this is what all cars should be like, and anything else just feels dated and wrong. And that's why I've struggled to enjoy the Model S so much. The Model S compared to other cars is like a spaceship, but the Model 3 is like the Millennium Falcon. So on this one, the Model 3 wins for me, hands down. Whilst we're talking about interiors, let's talk about space. So I'm 6'7", and the best place to start for me would be in the driver's seat. So both of the cars have more than enough room for the driver. In fact, I didn't actually notice a difference between the two in terms of driving position. If we go to the stats, the Model S has a super long 42.7 inches legroom up front, and the Model 3 comes in at the exact same. Headroom in the Model S is 38.8, and in the 3 is 40.3, meaning the Model 3 is actually bigger for the driver, just slightly, but apparently it's bigger headroom. Now, you wouldn't really notice that, but the Model 3 takes this one as well, but not too quick. Let's take a peek in the back. Now, according to Edmunds.com, they are very similar in passenger space. Whilst driving the S, I have felt that the rear space for passengers is a lot more substantial than the 3, but a lot of that comes down to width, which is actually, for me, is a huge issue. It's not because I'm massive or fat, it's because I have a huge bulky baby seat in the back, which squeezes the Model 3's interior space quite a bit. Meaning that if there's two adults in the back with the baby seat, it's a bit of a squeeze. Whereas the 3, I feel that there's plenty of room for all occupants, even with a baby seat. Again, Edmunds put similar legroom in the rear of the Model S as the Model 3. They put it very similar. And after testing, that seems to be true. Headroom in the Model S looks great in the back, but as you can see for me, tall occupants in the rear do struggle. It can be a bit of a net breaker, and it's very similar in the back of the Model 3, but apparently, according to Edmunds.com again, the Model 3 takes it again. In terms of this one, I'm going to give the point to Model S, but unless you plan on driving regularly with 4 large adults, I think the 3 is more than adequate. Keeping with space, let's talk about the boot and the frunk, or the fruit as I like to call it. So this is where there is a noticeable difference. So the Model 3 has a great space. It's so strange to have a boot under your boot, which is crazy. So like all these little boxes of space that's available in the Model 3, even having storage up front in the Model 3 is crazy. And all that space comes to 425 litres. Nothing to be sniffed at. That's quite a lot of room, and more than enough for most of your needs. But the Model S is pretty damn well impressive. So much so I've crawled into the back quite a few times. The Model 3 could probably take one dead body in the boot, but the Model S could probably take a couple bodies. The Model S comes in at double the Model 3, at 894 litres of space. And this is where most of the size difference is in the car. So when you compare the cars up, the Model S is obviously bigger in size, but the space is in the storage space. So that is another point for the used Model S. So heading back to the inside of the vehicle, we have the entertainment and the displays. So the Model S has a bigger screen, and it has a heads-up display for driving as well, which initially I thought was important. So when I was thinking about making the decision of buying the used Model S or the Model 3, the heads-up display was something I liked the idea of. But in all honesty, it's not needed. So after you become accustomed to the Model 3, you'll wonder why we ever had those weird things in front of the steering wheel anyway. So the Model S screen is bigger, but it's certainly not better. I'm not a fan of the big vertical screen. In the future, I'm really hoping they update to something similar like the 3. The screen position, it just adds to the bulkiness of the interior and the center console. And looks wise, I'm going to go with a 3 again. But what about functionality? So the screen on the S is just slower. It doesn't work as nicely. It's laggier. It feels dated. And that's because it is a bit. The 3 is sharper. It's faster. It works better. There's no bugs or problems with it. But not only that, the 3 has much more features. Much more. There's so many things missing in the S in the entertainment system that is definitely something to consider. So you will have no video function on all of the Model S's, and a lot of the games also will be missing as well. So most Model S's, the 18 plate and earlier, so 18 plate and earlier, shipped with the MCU1, which does not include these functions. So, I mean, I'm going to make a video just based on the entertainment system. So just for this, the Model 3 does beat the Model S on the entertainment side by a long shot. So that's definitely a point for the Model 3. This is a big deal for me. I personally find myself sat in the vehicle for long periods of time. And as a filmmaker, the ability to be able to put Netflix on is just like pure wizardry. So yeah, in the Model S, you're not going to have Netflix. You're not going to have Cuphead and the driver simulation games. You're not going to have YouTube and Twitch and all those sort of things. You're not going to have any of them. You'll just have the basic, very basic games. Yeah, which again, in other cars is worlds above. But when you've stepped inside that Model 3, it just feels slightly dated on the Model S. So, ride comfort. So handling and steering goes to the Model 3. It's just nimbler, it's more responsive, whereas the Model S, it's not terrible, but you really do feel the size when you're on the road. Then we move over to suspension. Now, suspension isn't bad in the 3. In fact, I think it's quite decent, but this also depends on the roads you drive. If you've got really like loads of potholes and stuff like that, you're going to have it's a little bit shaky inside. But again, I've driven a lot worse. It's not terrible. They've done a really good job with the suspension. But then we move over to the Model S and we have the adjustable air suspension, which offers a slightly smoother ride. It wasn't that noticeable in the difference between these two cars for me. And that could be down to the Model 3 being good, or it could be down to the used Model S not having the greatest air suspension. It's not enough for me to make me choose one over the other. I did, however, like the adjustable suspension in the Model S. And also the car notes the location of where you raise the suspension, and it does it automatically, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a cool trick to be able to put the car down really low as well. So I'm going to give it to the Model S, but one thing to note with this, if the air suspension breaks on your used Model S, you're going to have a huge bill to pay, which in my opinion outweighs the benefit of the air suspension for sure, like wildly outweighs the benefit of the air suspension, especially when the Model 3 is good enough. Plus with the S being so big in terms of driving, drive-throughs and all that sort of stuff, tight drive-throughs, car parks, it can be a little bit of a hassle. But again, like I say, I'm going to give it to the Model S based on fact, but if you are weighing in the cost of it, it might change your mind. Okay, this is an easy one, speed. So the standard range plus is quick. It has a 0 to 60 of 5.3 seconds. And in comparison to normal vehicles, you're going to be beating most people at the lights. In fact, this car from about 20 to 40, 20 to 50 is really rapid. But the P90D can run a 0 to 60 in launch mode. Now you have to preheat the battery, but people have recorded 2.6 seconds. So that's pretty insane. And this thing is crazy quick. It's like a kick in the back. I doubt anyone will pull up next to you who you can't beat off the line. And in fact, for me, it was a little bit too much. I've gotten used to it, but I really don't think I'm going to miss it that much. It's just something that you can't actually use that often. And if you do use it, you need to be extremely safe. But it makes me scared to think what the Roadster is going to feel like. But with sport mode on in the Model S, it feels very similar to the speeds of the standard range plus Model 3. The Model 3 is a little bit slower off the line, but in terms of like I say, that 20 to 40 speed, the sport mode on the S feels very similar. But here, the Model S wins. If you're in the market, though, for a P90D, you should definitely consider the Performance Model 3, which in most circumstances will be very similar speed, and I think it's more usable speed because you can just do it all the time. And also, when we're talking about price, the Model S P90D probably weighs up better with the Performance Model 3. So something to think about, but in terms of these two cars, the Model S takes it. Let's talk about charging times. So again, I want to make a video just following this point based on the charger, but I eagerly wanted to charge the Model S to see what kind of rates it would get in comparison to the Model 3 on our 22 kilowatt charger. But it turns out it was exactly the same as the Model 3. So both vehicles say it's charging at 16 amps, around 244 volts. I'm unsure if this is accurate, but because I don't really know about the amps, but that's what it says on the screen. Both of the cars are registering at 16 amps. But because of the efficiency of energy usage when they're on the road, it equates to different miles charged. So they have different mile per hour charge rates, and one does come out on top. So if you are charging the Model 3 with the 22 kilowatt charger at 16 amps, 244 volts, you're going to get 50 miles per hour of range added with our standard wall Tesla charger. But on the Model S, you only get 30, which actually makes a huge difference in charge times. It has increased the charging time for me quite a lot. So the Model 3 wins here, hands down. A thing to note though, when it comes to superchargers, they are similar still, but you are considering, if you're considering a long range or a performance Model 3, the Model 3 would take that one too. But yeah, something to consider, but the Model 3 takes the charging. Okay, something important to note here is the range. So this is a good one. A used Model S, there is going to be some battery degradation and there's going to be some miles lost from its original range. But as it stands, whatever it states on the clock is what you'll get from it. That's what I've experienced in the S. So it says it has a certain amount of range. It says a full charge on the S will get me 235 miles, which is slightly less than the original 270 miles, but very impressive considering it's done close to 70,000 miles on the clock. So in terms of the 235 miles, I found out that that was about what it was getting, so you can trust the number. The Model 3 Standard Range Plus should get you around 250 miles, which again, I found accurate if I'm driving sensibly, and that goes for both cars, driving sensibly. The only thing I've noticed between the two is with the Model 3, I have Sentry Mode on, which for me is using around 20 miles of range a day to have that running. But again, for me, it is worth it. But for me on this one, the Model 3 wins again. So remember as well that that's the standard range one. If you're looking at the long range or the performance model, you're going to beat a used Model S quite often. Unless you're looking at a higher price bracket for the Model S, again, then you stepping outside of this comparison between the two vehicles. Okay, so maintenance is where I think you really need to consider your options. Teslas are very low maintenance vehicles, but things do happen, and it's more likely to happen to the older car and later in life in the car, which is why you could find yourself purchasing a used Model S and quite quickly be stumped with a huge bill. And this is where the Model S has a huge downside. So things like air suspension, door handles, sunroofs, and much, much more have been well documented to fail at some point. But if you still consider buying one, you need to make sure that there's no issues with the one you buy in. There's no failure points. You need to test all those failure points. But for me, this is an easy one. The Model 3 will win every single time. I think the Model 3 would even win against a brand new Model S, because we're talking there's less fail points. And not to mention, with a new car, you're going to get the warranty, which definitely is going to give you more peace of mind. It's got to be touched on the running costs. Now, this isn't something people consider with an EV. But there is a big difference, in my opinion, in these two cars. So excluding maintenance, in terms of like things breaking, there are things you need to do each year, like an MOT. So that doesn't need to be done for the first 3 years of ownership. So the Model 3 would be excluded for the first 3 years. But a used car that's 3 years old, like the Model S you're thinking of buying, does need an MOT. You've got to MOT it every year to make sure it's roadworthy on the car, on the road. Tires on the the Model S are going to be worn. That's a few £100s to think of. It's quite expensive to replace everything. Brakes may be worn. I doubt it with the Teslas, but they could be worn, especially maybe after 70k. And again, the Model 3 is going to be fresh, so no tires to worry about, no brakes to worry about, nothing like that, no fluids or anything to worry about. But then there's the other big cost, and that's car insurance. So even though you might be able to buy a Model S for less than a Model 3, it doesn't always mean the insurance is cheaper. And on average, the insurance for the Model S was coming in at £100 more expensive for the year for the P90D, which is actually quite a fair price for someone like me. A lot of the reason for the similar pricing is they fit into the same insurance bracket. I think they're both in the highest bracket possible, I think. So you may be able to close the prices down on the two. You might be able to get them a little bit closer. But yeah, it's something to think about. Then there is the cost per mile. So a Model 3 on my electricity comes in at around 3 pence per mile, and the Model S is 4 pence. So I know when we're comparing these to diesel cars and that sort of stuff, that's really cheap. It doesn't sound ridiculous, but that's a 25% increase, and it's quite big. But if you're using the supercharger network quite regularly, then the chances are that your used Model S will come with free supercharging for life. So that is something to consider, and it could add up to a hell of a lot of money over the years in comparison to the Model 3. If you're going to be doing 90% of your charging at home, it's not going to make that much of an impact, but it does affect the numbers if you're avid supercharger. But if we're talking of the numbers, the Model 3 takes it again on this one. But if you equate the free supercharging, you could see the gap closing depending on how reliant you are on the network. For me, the nearest charge is 45 minutes away, so that is a no-go for me. And also, don't forget about resale value as well. A used vehicle tends to lose less on a percentage basis and than a new vehicle. Although at the moment, resales of Model 3s seem to be holding good prices, but that is probably going to change as Model 3s become more of an average car in the UK, and we see more of them on the road. So you're going to lose slightly more value on the Model 3 than you would on the Model S over the first 3 years, because the Model S has already had that initial price loss from when it was brand new. So something to consider again. But for me, the Model 3 is winning on the average yearly running costs of the car. Okay, so now a big one. This is one of the biggest factors you need to consider, and that is price. Now, you could expect to pick up a P90D for around £48,000 to £50,000 with a similar spec and miles to the car that I'm driving right here. And that's not to say that you can't get a better deal than that, and or a worse deal than that, but this is just sort of the average I've found out. And that is creeping into Model 3 performance money. The Model 3 Standard Range Plus will set you back £39,000, so it's looking around £10,000 cheaper. So for me, this is where it happens. I have a clear winner. It has to be the Model 3 Standard Range Plus. If I was looking at spending £50,000, there's no doubt in my mind that I would stretch it just to buy the performance Model 3. So yeah, if you can stretch it up to the 50 grand to buy a P90D, buy the performance Model 3. It is going to be worlds above. Do not compare. There's no comparison, honestly. The Model 3 driving is a dream, and I can only imagine having that performance in the Model 3. So who should buy the Model S? Who is going to buy the Model S? So the Model S is for people who need the little extra room, who want the little extra attention on the road, who want to have more attention on the road, and who want to be a little bit more flashy, and who wants people to be able to beat anyone at the lights. But again, Performance Model 3 does that same job. But really, I don't think most of the positives in the P90D are required for 99% of the people, apart from space, obviously, but the benefits of the P90D are just not required. So the speed of the 3 is more than enough. If you go to the performance, then you're going to be keeping up with the P90D, and there's also peace of mind that you get with a new car that you won't have with a used car. So for the masses, choose the Model 3. You will not regret it. For the flashy who want the extra attention and the speed, choose the performance model. For the slightly more sensible, choose the long range over the standard range. But I don't think in these price brackets you should consider the S. That is just my opinion. Now, if you are able to get the Model S for cheaper, it is possible. It might be worth a consideration. In fact, the Model S has had so much of an impression on me that we are considering to buy a used Model S, but the price has got to be really low. A lot lower than a Model 3. Otherwise, there's no point. But again, that is just my opinion. But even then, even if we had the Model S on the drive, I would choose the Model 3 as my daily driver. Hands down. It is just better of a car. It's just so well refined. It's so much better. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for tolerating me. If you've made it this far, you're an absolute legend. I know some of you who watch have bought Model 3s, and I want to say congratulations. And anyone who is thinking about buying a Model 3, please use the link in the description. You get 1,000 free supercharging miles, which is only going to aid your journey as a Model 3 owner. And I also get the exact same, and it supports the channel. Anyway, thanks for watching. And if you haven't subscribed, click the bell, all those nice things and everything. Thanks, guys, for the support. This has been crazy. You guys are the best. And goodbye.